It's v.h.s.x. What do you mean?
Alright everybody, welcome back. We got another video today that I wanted to talk about that was actually suggested by one of you guys in the Discord community, so shout out to Sinoble for this Twitter post written by Hens that says the design space for killer powers in Dead by Daylight is very limited, with there being 43 killer powers already and arguably every single power archetype being tried and tested. There could very well never be another killer that does not feel like a copied element of others. Now, I 100% agree with this. It's a common misconception with this game and a lot of the people that play this game that genuinely believe that the game is just limitless and it has so much potential and has so many things it can add, and oh my goodness, it's just imagination. That's all they need. It's like, no, that's not how it works. The code is very limited. I understand that not a lot of people develop games or understand how games work, but usually if we're talking about, I would say even a good example is like Bethesda or something. As an example, like we've seen time and time again that they just keep reusing that same engine, for example, and the same bugs that consisted in those games were always the same. The games were very similar to one another, as we saw with Skyrim and Fallout and stuff like that. They usually had the same engine, different games, and they usually had similar mechanics, and they were not really doing anything so outside of the box. They would have to make a brand new engine, and they probably won't do that because that takes too many resources that they don't care enough to actually put in. So with that being obviously stated, that's similar to how DBD works. With the fact of the matter is that there is limitations within the code. Now obviously I'm not a game developer myself to be able to give the nitty-gritty, like, you know, whatever, but I have covered somebody who was a game developer in the past who discussed the same topic and had actually given a bit more information than I could talking about this topic. Now, like I've stated, the game has its limits. It simply is like, we're not going to be able to say get characters that run on walls or can fly super high above the ground or anything like that. We're not going to be able to have, you know, I'm not even sure. Like, I remember back around when Spring Drive came out, people were asking for like some pretty crazy stuff. Even back then, I was like, it's not going to work. Like, you have to work within the limitations of the coding, the limitations of the game and its engine, all that kind of stuff. There's not a lot left you can do. I mean, even if you want to look at another example, you can look at the Moris. They specifically have to like add in assets on top of the character models because they literally just can't dismember the sort of the survivors, pretty much, because they would have to add new objects and all that kind of stuff, and they obviously don't like to do that. That's why when we see Moris, usually it's very like on the head or the face, or they're like bending something, like we saw with Vecna and Sadako. Like they keep it very, you know, very limited to that. You're not seeing somebody like, say, drop a car on their head or something. Like, they just, you know what I mean? It's very limited, and it's pretty obvious. But let's go ahead and read some. So it says, so Hen says, this is one of the video essay topics I plan on making for a year now, but never for around to it. Maybe I still should. This person replies and says the same applies to perks, honestly. The game has hit a road in terms of innovation that definitely can't be improved unless the entire game enters a new technical era with more possibilities. And then Hens replies, I think there is more chance to innovate on perks than killer powers, but you are right, the majority will be different activation conditions. It's 100% true. I mean, there's not a lot left in this dated code. It's like, they like to call it spaghetti code for a reason. And this person, of course, is one of the many that have that misconception that say, as a horror author, I can come up with multiple powers that work in the game, do not copy other killers. This is being lazy, and Hen says do it. Then he like drops like a thing. which says something I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but basically it says something about some kind of zones or something. And then it says that they can stay inside of some kind of zone. It sounds horrible though. Yeah, it just says something about a revenant and like coming out of it, whatever. It doesn't sound very interesting. It's a cool concept, as Hens says. As I said in another comment, trap killers are definitely the one archetype that still has room to explore. I do fear this killer would be extremely bad on the higher skill levels. Not sure what I would say. You created a new archetype here. And then the person replies by saying, I wasn't aiming for a high tier killer, I was aiming for original power, which is ascribed to something like what's in game. I'm sure that with more than 40 minutes to come up with an idea, it would be better. And then Hens replies, you misunderstood my original comment. I did not imply that you can't make any killers anymore, but they will fit into boxes that other killers already fit into, which leads to the comments you see after every killer release. Quote, this is just a revamp of Springtrap. There was to be a trapper hag / area control score merchant singularity killer. But that's exactly like what I'm saying, what Hens is saying. We're both saying the same thing. People have this strange misconception that it's going to be brand spanking new every day. Like, it's just not how it works. There are certain things that are consistent in the game that can be done. They can have a different character that represents those things. They can do those things. But at the end of the day, they're going to still be around the same things we've already seen in the game, just in different forms. And Dracula was definitely one of those examples. A lot of people were crashing out about that. Oh my goodness, he has Pyramid Head's power and spirit. And it's like, yeah, like, what did you think was going to happen? Like, this is to be expected. I don't really understand, like, what people are trying to say. Like, there's like nothing so gigantically drastic than what we can see available in the game that's going to be added. It needs to work off of stuff that's already in the game, because that's the limitations of the code. You know what I'm saying? That's why it boils down to, when you boil down every character, it usually boils down to, oh, it's just this character, and this character, and that character. Like, they just do that every time. And if you dumb it down to that, every character is going to do that. Like, that's just how it works. There's not really a lot of ways to step outside of that. So this person says, what kind of argument is this? That's how games work. You have archetypes. But nobody complains about, example from Rivals, that Black Cat is similar to Spider-Man just because they both make lots of damage and both can climb on walls. Which is actually, if you're really trying to be accurate, you would actually compare Black Cat more to Black Panther, because they both have a dash, they both can climb the wall, they both have a double jump, and they both are diver duelists to go after the backline. The difference is she has a swiping attack. She has, like, of course, a bunch of different little, like little powers that she could pull out of her shop. But those powers in the shop are also things that are already in the game. And I think that people are not really understanding that. Like, when you look at the powers of the shop, like, you have stuff like, okay, you can gamble for more coins. You can have a fish to have invisibility. Who else has invisibility? Psylocke. Runs fast, invisible. Boom, Psylocke. You have the other power, like that little, like, I don't know if it's a fish. I forget what she throws down, like a zone or something she could toss on the ground. That's the same thing that Devil Dino does, which technically he came out later, but you get the point. Like, grounding the people also was on the thing. That was also another mechanic that already existed. As an example, right? So it was Helm of Hades, I mentioned, the gambling stone thing. We also have that fish. And then it was like another one that, like, takes off the status effects, which also Gambit can do as well. So you can say, oh, but you know, like Rivals, but Rivals also shows that example very quickly and easily. Like, it's takes like 2 seconds. You use your brain and you realize that you're incorrect. So then they say so Hens says the design space is limited and there's you can only have so many until you run into repeats in some way or form that will get worse with more killers being added unless you open up the design space in some ways, allowed verticality, for example. I think a lot of players did not really think about it that way, given every single killer that releases nowadays. You see an absurd amount of "this is just Springtrap 2.0" comments, which is very true. And then unless you can make a shapeshifter, which, I mean, I'm not entirely sure how you would go about doing that. You can definitely say that Dracula technically is a shapeshifter, so technically speaking it could work, because if Dracula can do it, then maybe another character can do it. Hens says, I don't know if you can release a killer that will end up being worse than Trapper in the big 2026. Might be too late nowadays. Has potential as a secondary power, but given the strength level on the lower level, whichever killer you put this on, you're essentially dooming them to be the worst killer in the game on a higher level. So is it really worth it? Which I have to appreciate that Hens is at least trying to look out for both sides of the spectrum. I know a lot of people like to plug their ears the second that high level gets mentioned, because they don't play in it, so they think that it doesn't exist, because that's the usual logic with the DBD community. They think that if they didn't see it, therefore it doesn't exist. That doesn't make any sense, but that's what DBD community does. And yeah, at the end of the day, I have to appreciate that Hens is at least looking out, man, because we need people to do that. And then this person says, I think there's a lot of potential for powers. You can basically have infinite powers if you just include lots of power effects. Some have bars that fill over time, some charge from certain interactions, and they can all have different effects. You have an infinite combination, which is why modern killers usually are a combination of multiple archetypes that already existed prior. I think you slightly misunderstood what I was saying here. Exactly. Because that's the thing, that people like to make up these like fancy little concepts, but it's like you have to also keep in mind that they have to fit within the confines of the code. So that's when I looked at, like, say, Horser with his Nemesis rework, I thought it was perfect, because it took things that are already in the game, it took things that could already be coded, it took things that are actually possible, versus just making up some stuff and just saying, oh yeah, that'll work. It's like, no, that's not how that works. Like, you have to make it work the same way to other things. And then this person says, are you truly going to act like, because this is slightly different from Knight and Twins, it's not nearly the same concept? The whole point is players wanting something that actually feels new to play, to play against. Is cool and all, but it's the same thing with different conditions and design. But yeah, like, that's just how it is. And then we obviously have Scott rolling in to say that the last completely unique killer was Singularity. Maybe. So I don't know. A lot of people are showing up here. The judgment is going to be a big test for this theory. Fan archetypes explore for powers of behavior ever feels confident enough, technically speaking, to tackle them, but I agree for the most part. But I'm actually curious to hear what you guys think on the topic at hand today. Do you agree or disagree with the topic? Do you agree or disagree with me and Hens on this topic? Let me know in the comment section. And consider becoming a member on YouTube or Patreon. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Alright, let's go ahead and read off these wonderful members. We got Patreon, Crow Vader. All my YouTube members, Brando, Evil Blade, Cap Courteous, WTF You're Not J-Lo, Evil Peach, Hargan Falcon, Dole Whip, Noxus, Zero Mocker, Jack, Christian, and Crow Vader. Really appreciate you guys supporting, man. And if you also subbed on Twitch, just know that you got love coming your way too. Appreciate you guys, man.